Hi, I'm Allison Saunders, Tax Incentives Director for the Louisiana Division of Historic Preservation. Welcome to this webinar on maintaining the historic character of your building. Today we're going to discuss how to maintain your building's historic character. We'll cover two main topics. First, we'll discuss historic districts and what makes a building a contributing element to the district. And second, we'll find out how to maintain the historic character of a building using the Secretary of the Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation. The first step in evaluating the historic character of your property is to determine if your building is located within the boundaries of a historic district. At the State Historic Preservation Office, we usually work with National Register districts. A National Register district is an area of contiguous resources including sites, buildings, structures, and objects united historically or aesthetically by plan or physical development. Districts come in all shapes and sizes. They can be residential, commercial, industrial, or rural in nature. The presence of a resource within the boundaries of a National Register district does not guarantee its place on the register. Each resource must be evaluated to determine if it has the age, importance, and integrity to qualify. For example, in a district that has been designated due to its age and architectural merit, a building built outside the period of significance, or which has been so altered that it is no longer recognizable as historic, would not be considered contributing to the significance of the district. There are a few things to keep in mind when you're considering whether or not a building is contributing to the district. If a building is covered with a non-historic covering, that covering must be removed to determine whether the building retains its historic facade. For example, if a Victorian building is covered with a 1960s applied windowless front, the 1960s material must be removed to determine whether its installation caused damage to the original facade. Some historic properties contain multiple buildings that were functionally related historically to serve an overall purpose. Together, the buildings in these properties are considered to be one single property for rehabilitation purposes. So, to sum up evaluating historic character, consider the location and age of your building. Consider the construction materials originally used. Consider the surrounding buildings. Does your building fit in with the historic district? And so now we'll move on to the standards. All rehabilitation projects must meet the Secretary of the Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation. The standards apply to buildings of all types, sizes, uses, and materials. They apply to exteriors and interiors. They extend to building site and environment, landscape and attached, adjacent, and related new construction. All 10 standards must be met. Meeting 7 out of 10 is not an option. The 10 standards are based on 3 basic principles. Number 1, retain and repair historic materials, features, and spaces. Number 2, retain the building's historic character, even if the use changes. And number 3, design compatible, reversible additions and alterations. Standard number 1. This deals with compatible new use. Standard number 1 recommends minimal change to a building to meet the new use and states, a property shall be used for its intended historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment. Standard number 2 deals with historic character. Standard 2 states, the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. Standard 3. Each property is a physical record of its time. Standard 3 states, each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. So don't create a false sense of historical development through conjectural features or borrowings. Standard number 4 deals with acquired significance. Standard 4 states, most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. Standard 5 deals with preserving distinct features, finishes, techniques, and craftsmanship. Standard 5 states, distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques, or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a historic property, shall be preserved. Standard 6. Standard 6 states, deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. Replacement of missing features shall be substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. Standard 7 states, chemical or physical treatments such as sandblasting that cause damage to historic materials shall not be used. The surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, shall be undertaken using the gentlest means possible. Standard number 8 deals with the protection of archaeological resources. Standard 8 states, significant archaeological resources affected by a project shall be protected and preserved. If such resources must be disturbed, mitigation measures shall be undertaken. Standards 9 and 10 both deal with new additions and adjacent new construction. Standard 9 states, new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. Standard 10 states, new additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. Together, these standards cover both new additions that are attached to historic buildings and new construction on the historic property surrounding the building itself. So now that we have a good understanding of the standards, let's look at a few more examples. To meet the standards, the rehabilitation work must retain distinctive features and craftsmanship, as was done in the rehabilitation of the new Amsterdam Theater in New York City for continued use as a theater. It's important to repair historic features in fabric rather than replace them, and when something is too deteriorated to be repaired, you replace it to match. In this rehabilitation, the wood siding and shingles are being repaired. Sections of the material that are too deteriorated to be repaired are being replaced to match. The historic features and character of the former Arabella Busbourne in New Orleans are retained in a rehabilitation that converted it to a grocery store and parking garage. The success of this project also illustrates the fact that unusual and difficult to reuse buildings have been successfully rehabilitated using the tax incentives. Many rehabilitation treatments are common across building types and must be planned carefully in order to ensure a successful rehabilitation project. On the exterior, owners should err on the side of caution in the treatment of windows and any changes to primary elevations. On the interior, historic plans and corridors, features and finishes, and large spaces that are character-defining elements of a historic building, and they all must be considered in planning for a new use. The impact of new construction, new additions, or rooftop additions on the historic building must be analyzed very carefully. Windows are a character-defining feature of most historic buildings. They should be repaired. Generally, windows must be deteriorated beyond repair in order to receive approval to replace them. When windows are deteriorated beyond repair, they must be replaced to match. Replacement windows must match the appearance, size, design, proportions, and profiles of the existing windows. They must fit the openings properly and must be in the same plane as the historic windows, and must be compatible with the historic window. Here only the wood sash was replaced with matching new wood sash. The wood window frame was retained. Overall, the depth, profile, and shadow lines of the original window remain. Changes to primary elevations should be minimized. For example, installing new features such as balconies on primary elevations changes the character of a historic building and does not meet the standards. A rehabilitation proposal needs to accommodate changes for the new use and retain historic floor plans, corridors, and features. As previously mentioned, extensive demolition of interior elements is one of the leading causes for denial of rehabilitation projects. All the historic corridor and partition walls have been removed in this building. The support beams remain to mark the former locations of the historic corridors. These two before and after rehabilitation examples illustrate the preservation of corridors and historic features. The corridors have been retained along with their features and finishes, wainscoting and door surrounds, and transoms. Corridors that have been finished historically should remain finished. Mechanicals should not be exposed as they are in the photograph on the left. Boxing in mechanicals in certain areas is one option to install new mechanicals while retaining the historic ceiling height as shown on the right. Another option is to place new mechanical systems in utilitarian areas as shown in this drawing. The new soffit for mechanicals is above the transom head on the room side of the corridor wall. New mechanicals should never cover the heads of windows. Existing wall penetration should be used where possible in order to avoid destruction of historic materials. This is a creative way to retain the original multi-light classroom doors in a former school while providing the required fire separation. A new door has been installed behind the multi-light door, so when residents open the solid doors in their unit, the original doors act as screen doors. Historic wall surfaces should be preserved in a rehabilitation. Historically finished spaces must remain finished spaces. Their wall surfaces should be repaired or replaced in kind where they are too deteriorated to the point that they cannot be repaired. For example, the finished space on the left has been deconstructed to look like a warehouse. In the upper right, plaster has been partially removed to create a wall feature and to highlight a fireplace mantel. The exposed brick and deconstructed interior look may be trendy, but they do not meet standards. In the same manner, historically exposed brick surfaces, such as those found in real loft buildings or industrial buildings, should be left bare. Historic features and finishes uncovered during rehabilitation work should also be preserved. Before rehabilitation, the finishes in the dining room of this hotel appeared to date from the mid to late 20th century and to lack any historic significance. Removal of these non-significant elements revealed early 20th century mosaic tile, which was restored. Sometimes code challenges threaten his interior. Here, adding a simple new top railing enabled the preservation of a historic stair without changing its character. Another common code challenge is open stairs. Many localities will grant waivers to retain open stairs and achieve fire rating by doing a combination of treatments. One successful option is a glazed wall that retains the visual connection of the staircase and the corridor and then satisfies fire code requirements. The treatment of large interior spaces is important to the success of a rehabilitation project. In many cases, large spaces can accommodate some changes, but the changes must be carefully designed to retain the historic character of the space. Subdividing the space horizontally with a new floor level that bisects the windows does not meet the standards. Carefully placing a mezzanine in the center of a large space retains the historic open character and appearance of the space and meets standards. New construction, including new additions and rooftop additions, is another rehabilitation concern. New construction must preserve the historic character of and be compatible with the historic building. Here, the new construction reads as a separate building along an urban street, and it is separated from the historic building with a new glass connector that clearly differentiates the old from the new. To meet the standards, additions must be compatible with the historic building's massing, size, scale, and architectural features, and must be differentiated from the historic building to preserve its character. The addition shown here, which duplicates the historic house, does not meet the standards. A rooftop addition must not alter the historic appearance and character of a building. The rooftop additions on this brewery to the left and office building to the right change the distinctive profiles of the buildings and therefore do not meet the standards. Generally speaking, buildings must be at least 4 stories tall in order to accommodate a rooftop addition. On the left, note that the setback of the rooftop addition between the historic party walls makes the new addition only minimally visible. It does not detract from the historic character of the 4-story building. On the right, the rooftop addition is also minimally visible, but it blends in well with this mid-rise building. Remember the 10 standards that are based on 3 basic principles. Retain and repair historic materials, features, and spaces. Retain the building's historic character even if the use changes. And design compatible, reversible additions and alterations. So to recap tax incentives, historic character, and the standards. If you're considering applying for tax incentives for your historic rehabilitation, here are some things to keep in mind. Contact the State Historic Preservation Office early in the planning process for advice both on preparing a complete application and on rehabilitation treatments. Submit a complete application to the State Historic Preservation Office well before beginning work. That application should include good, clear photographs of the entire building and site before work begins, and a narrative describing the full scope of work. Applicants are strongly advised not to begin work until the Part 2 application has been approved by the National Park Service or the State Historic Preservation Office, depending on the programs they're utilizing. Proceeding with work can lead to some of the problems we've discussed. Here are some more keys to a successful rehabilitation. Have a clear understanding of the character-defining elements of the building and the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. These are the keys to determining where changes can and cannot be made to accommodate the new use. Follow through with the work as approved and submit project amendments for any changes after approved work begins. Most projects change somewhat during the construction phase. Changes are expected and are not a problem, but failure to submit amendments and receive approval for the changes can lead to work that does not meet the standards. Be an informed owner. A well-informed owner is the best asset a project can have. A well-informed owner will be able to identify problems and ask for help from the SHPO and/or the National Park Service so that problems can be solved before they're irreversible. A project owner should be able to complete the application for a small to medium-sized project, but for large or complicated projects, owners may want to hire an experienced team. Good members of the team would be an architect, a preservation consultant, and an accountant or a tax attorney. The owner must take the responsibility to ensure good communication among the team members. Make sure at least one of the members of your team has gone through this process before. These are some of the most common pitfalls that derail rehabilitation projects. First would be proceeding with the rehabilitation work before receiving the Part 2 approval. That's the biggest pitfall. If the applicant has done work that does not meet the standards, and if no remedial work can undo the problematic work, the rehabilitation project will not be approved. Refusing to negotiate project changes in response to guidance provided by the SHPO and National Park Service is another pitfall. During their reviews, these offices may identify work that doesn't meet the standards and may make recommendations for modifications that will meet the standards. Applicants who are unwilling to explore changes may not receive approval of their projects. A final and unfortunately all too common pitfall is assuming that local review undertaken and approval received equals approval of the Part 2 application. It does not. Each year, approximately 2 to 4% of the over 1,000 projects submitted for review do not meet the standards and are denied certification of rehabilitation. There is a strong correlation among the keys to a successful project, the pitfalls that derail successful projects, and the causes for denial of certification. The first is insufficient pre-rehab photographic documentation. Without pre-rehab documentation, the SHPO and the National Park Service cannot evaluate the proposed work and therefore cannot approve the project. A second leading cause of denial is work that has already been completed and does not meet the standards. As previously mentioned, the National Park Service consistently encourages applicants not to begin work until the Part 2 has been approved. Another common cause of denial is a program that is too intense for building and site. While the program itself may be reasonable, it may be too intense for the historic property. As an exaggerated example, converting a row of townhouses into 3 apartments might be a program that meets the standards, but turning the same row houses into 7 apartments likely would not meet the standards. It's not the use, but the intensity of the use and the level of change it causes that lead a project not to meet the standards. In terms of specific rehabilitation treatments, substantial interior demolition is the leading cause of denial of certification of a rehabilitation. This is often related to the intensity of the program. Converting a building to 3 apartments will be less intrusive than converting it to 7 apartments. If you think that you or your client may be interested in applying for tax incentives, please remember to contact us at the State Historic Preservation Office as early as possible. We are here to help.